5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Uncle Ron and stuff. Still playing with background and the green screen. You can see I finally got a video to play in the background. No significance to that, but anyway, today's topic, and I think I've become a talking head, which established right up front, I have no credibility. I don't have a PhD in anything. My only credibility is on this particular topic that I'm 78 years old and I have been aware and watched and learned my life. And today's topic is federal government overreach / Department of Education. Trump and Musk are talking about getting rid of the Department of Education. And everybody's saying, well, that's a horrible thing. And I'd like to give some backfill on it with the emphasis on overreach by the federal government. No one can debate that there is a need in the federal government to have an environmental protection agency. You really can't leave that up to the states, because air pollution in one state will literally blow into another state, or rivers are shared, so a state upstream cannot pollute the water that's going to go downstream into some other state's water supply. There's definitely a need for an environmental protection agency that does establish regulations on all of the states when it comes to environmental protection. Part of the deal on environmental protection is that, yes, we have a department of it, and there are various scientists and researchers, and they collect data on everything, and then they come up with some new regulation. And I don't know, I expect there is funding like everything else. There is some EPA funding that goes to the states that helps them with various environmental problems. I know there is a environmental cleanup fund, super cleanup fund, that some sites in various states are so polluted that there's no way that they could single-handedly clean that site up, and they need federal funds to do that. Some of these programs can last for 20 years. I think there are now several nuclear power processing plants that were built during World War II for the creation of atomic bombs that are so highly polluted with radioactivity that the government will probably be there for 100 years, spending money on trying to unpollute that massive area. Anyway, there is reasons for various departments, and there are reasons for like an EPA to be in effect, where the impact of one state, something that one state does, may impact another state. That's where the federal has some responsibility. Someone will say that's an overreach. I don't think so. Now let's come to the Department of Education. We did not always have a Department of Education. That's the first thing. In fact, the United States did not always have public, what was known as free, what is free? Public education. We didn't have that either. It was a good idea. Everybody accepts the fact that educated population is better than an uneducated population. At least what has been defined for 1 through 12 grades. 12 years of public education. And over the years, every city and county in the United States has a public education system that is funded through real estate taxes and other forms of taxation on the people who live in that particular district that use those public education facilities. Unfortunately, not all counties and cities are in the same economic condition. There are counties in various parts of the country that are very sparsely populated. Uh, they don't have a lot of what you would call real estate taxes or other collections. So the counties and cities in those localities have trouble maintaining a high level of public education from a facilities point of view, as well as a teacher excellence point of view. Those schools in the outlanding Appalachian Mountains or in counties in the middle of Oklahoma or some other place, they cannot raise real estate taxes or enough revenue to properly keep facilities and a highly educated and well experienced teaching staff on order available. So we had disparities in public education throughout the United States. Some cities and counties were great, i.e. some states had better than others, based on economics primarily and population. Some states, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, there was racism when public education came along. We would build schools and supply teachers for the white population, the black population. That was a struggle, but I grew up in a small town in Virginia, and we had an all-white public education system, and we had, at least I know of, a black high school. I do not remember a black elementary school or secondary school. If they were, I did not know where they were. I never saw them. I do know there was a black high school located on the fringe of the city. I believe it was the only black high school. There was, I don't know, it may have been shared by the city and the county at that point. But there was a significant disparity between funding for white populated schools as opposed to black populated schools. That was definitely true for a long, long time. And eventually segregation of schools and other public venues was put away by legislation. No more segregation, so that public schools and universities had to be segregated. That was probably the first time where there was thoughts given to a Department of Education, and I might not have the timeline perfectly right, and that maybe the Department of Education came along at the time of the legislation for school desegregation. I'm not exactly sure. But there was concern at the federal government level by the House Representatives and Senators that we are aware that public education is not of consistent quality across all states. Some states are very good, some states are not so good. We think that every student in every state ought to have availability or an equality of facilities and teachers. Curriculum courses, they should be at least some sort of standardization across all states as to what facilities and teaching staff is available to the students in that state. The only way to do that will establish a Department of Education. And for a while, I think we actually doled out money through the Department of Education to various states to try to help them improve their public and even their university education system. But nothing is free. And here's the overreach aspect of every department in the federal government. They established the Department of Education and started, I don't know how it was funding at the time, maybe there were specific programs The federal government would, if the states applied for money to retrofit all the facilities, the government might put that in their budget and ship it to them. I'm not sure exactly how that worked at the time, but what happened over time was when Ronald Reagan became president, he saw that there was overreach, that by states asking for federal money for educational facilities and so on, that those in power within the agency were putting strings on that money. They were saying, well, you got to do this. If you want that money, you got to do that. They were establishing basically policies without any regulatory. Let me see if I can get the other lights to come back on. I haven't got this right yet, but apparently not. Okay. I'm going to leave it the way it is. Reagan decided the better way to do it was to do block grants. Based on some algorithms, the student population, whatever, blah, 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 that instead of piecemealing it out program by program, here's an initiative to improve all of the school facilities or to physical fitness. We're going to make everybody physically fit by requiring various testing on that before you can get the money for a new gym. He said, we're going to leave more up to the states and we'll block grant money based on some algorithm that each year a certain amount of money would just be given to the state, and they, in their wisdom, to decide how, when, and where to spend it. That was the idea of block grants, and it was to remove some governmental strings attached to that money. Leave more of the decisions about a local's public education with those who were there as opposed to bureaucrats in Washington. Okay. Well, block grant idea did work. It's still in effect. You'll hear about block grants for Medicaid. Now, this is a program that the federal government started a good idea again, that those in poor economic conditions, especially women and children, should have access to some level of medical practices of medical care. Okay, Medicaid came into being. It was to provide some level, at least a minimum amount of medical health to primarily single women or mothers with children. And it was a good idea because the little child was not, why should he pay for the fact he was born into a poor family or maybe into a racial, still have discrimination, black family, so on and so on. Medicaid came along, and this was a federally funded program that had no funding source. Medicare, when that was established, money was taken out of the paycheck of every worker to help pay for his Social Security and his health care and retirement. Money is currently being taken out of everybody who gets a paycheck for those two things. In the case of Medicaid, that is not true. There is no tax per se to fund the Medicaid system, and it is one of the larger expenses in the federal budget. Defense is obviously a federal responsibility. Immigration is a federal responsibility. They failed horribly on that the last 4 years. Nonetheless, back to Overreach and the Department of Education. So here we have block grants for education going out based on some algorithm, and each year would be adjusted perhaps on the population density or whatever. They might have somebody even go out into that state and examine the system and run tests and so on. Okay, we give you this much money a year, but the state and locality was the ones who decided how to, when, where, and how to spend it. And in no way did federal funds erase the need for that locality or city or county to raise their own money for public education via real estate taxes and sales taxes and whatever else. And public education is the major funding requirement for any city or county, is the public education that they provide. And by and large, most people who live in those cities and counties support public education. Now, there is cases where a school board will decide that they need gold-colored laptops, gold-trimmed laptops, and that is for the school board and the supervisors and whoever else who decide to say, no, I don't think you need gold-covered laptops. So there is a push and pull at that level, and that's where it really does belong. Anyway, any money that comes from the federal government is sent from the federal government to the states or the counties for public education started having strings on it. We think that your curriculum ought to include a rewrite of history, and you ought to stop emphasizing the American Civil War and the way that you have been projecting it. When I was in Virginia, and as a young boy, my history lessons indicated that the American Civil War was all about states' rights. There was really no emphasis put on slavery. This was a states' rights issue. Those states in the South who became the Confederacy just did not want to be controlled and told what to do by the North and the people in Washington, D.C. That was what we were told. Yes, there was slavery in the South, and yes, one aspect of that was that the North was saying you can't have any more slaves. They had already enacted a law, I think in 1820 or something, that slavery was banned in the United States. No more slavery. Well, there was always ways around that, and slavery did not end in 1820. And the North looked the other way, and slavery did continue, certainly in the South. And finally, there was legislation put in that new states that are coming into the United States of America cannot have slaves. Well, that angered a lot of people. In certain states, they needed a lot of labor for their agricultural-based economy, and the only way to do that economically was slavery. So they were being told they couldn't when they wanted to. So it was, again, a states' rights issue, and one big element of that was whether we can have slavery or not. Okay, so back to the Department of Education. They decide that we'll give you the block money, but we want you to rewrite your history books. We don't agree. We've decided that it is best for everybody to get the same story on American history. There's things we want you to put in, the emphasis more on women, the emphasis more on blacks, emphasis on this, doing that. There were strings associated with money coming out of the federal government on the Department of Education. And they said, if you want the money, you got to do this. That is overreach. That is what nobody likes and cares for about the federal government. If you go away from Washington, D.C., you go out in the country, in any place in the United States, do not tell them you're from Washington, D.C., or that you even live close to Washington, D.C., because they don't want anything to do with you. They don't think kindly of those in Washington because they have power to tell me what to do all the time about everything. Because of various fundings that come from the feds, they're entitled to put stipulations on that money. Back to the Department of Education. The idea of block grants to states or counties, however it's done, is not a bad idea. Raising the education, overall quality of education in the United States is a very good idea. Poor states should at least, it would improve the economic lot of everybody in those states if their education, quality of education was raised some, and that may need federal money to do that as opposed to state or local money. That is a great idea. You shouldn't throw that out. And I don't think they are talking about throwing that out. What the problem is all these strings that have been attached, lots of them by regulators in various departments that were never elected by anybody. It is certainly not in the rules and parameters that define the essence of the Department of Education. That is the objection. That is the problem. That is the issue with all of the departments in the United States government. We have immigration. They didn't even obey the laws. The Department of Immigration decided that they would not obey laws that were on the books. There were laws about how you could legally enter the United States, and coming across the border in the middle of the night was not one of them. But they decided that, hey, well, we'll let you come in and then apply for asylum, or we'll let you do this or that, which was totally against the laws on the books. But they were above the law. Now, states and cities and counties filed suit in federal courts, and that's where any suit about the federal government has to go, is the federal court. But it takes years to go through federal courts to finally, if you will, get to the Supreme Court where a decision is made. Back on the Department of Education, when Clinton was elected president, the first thing he wanted to do was raise income tax rates. And I said, I sent him an email, I sent him a letter saying, I'm not opposed to that, but it's time for every item, every budget item in the federal budget every year to be reviewed somehow and to see in some way, shape, or another, do we still need to be funding this particular program? All I was asking for, it was a review of spending at every single line item in the federal budget. Take a department line by line. What are they asking money for? What do they spend money for? Somewhere in the Department of Education, there's a bunch of people employed who are always looking for the DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion idea. That was another Department of Education string attached money regulation. You down at the county and city level have got to start adjusting your programs, your teaching practices, everything around the idea of diversity, equality, and inclusion. Now, there are people who can argue that all those things are good things, and I don't disagree that they're not. But federal strings mandating them so from the federal government, I'm not sure that's really belongs to them, where you say the federal government had to outlaw racism, segregation. And they did that, but it didn't stop the humans from continuing to do it. There's only so much federal regulation can do. It tries to set an example, perhaps, but it doesn't solve the problem, not at the human level. That takes years, years, and years, and years. Okay, Department of Education, go through it line item by line item and see what you spend on, and you would be shocked at all of the various programs, all of the various grants that are spent, and you say, well, 100,000 here and 100,000 there, what does that mean? Or 500,000 or a couple million. All that adds up. Department of Agriculture subsidized milk for a long time. During the Great Depression, milk production becomes slack, and the idea was that children should not be denied access to milk. It was important for them to get milk to have strong bones and good health. So the American Department of Agriculture started subsidizing dairy farmers. It would give them money so they could put milk on the market at a price less than it could be honestly produced on farms. A good idea, made sense at the time, but we're still doing it in some form or another. Tobacco. Tobacco is another subsidy. We subsidize tobacco farmers. If they have a crop and it fails, they have probably insurance through the federal government that takes care of that. I could be wrong on certain aspects of this. Sometimes stuff change. The Department of Agriculture does subsidize various agricultural products. Not a whole lot different than what the Chinese have been doing over the years, which we don't like. If the federal government is subsidizing wheat, for example, they want to keep a base price for wheat so that we continue to grow enough wheat for our purposes and perhaps export, then that is the same thing that the Chinese are doing on like electric vehicles. A lot of them are being subsidized by the Chinese government for their own use as well as for export. We claim it's an unfair trade practices. We've been doing the same thing for years through federal subsidies, from agriculture, from everything you can think of. We've done it from the military aspect. All you have to do is say something is strategically important to the U.S. defense, be it minerals, steel, electronics, computer chips, whatever it is. All as soon as you put that tag on it is strategic value. Then the federal government has every right to do whatever they want, literally. And if we need lithium because we're dependent on China for lithium, it's okay. EPA rules go out the window. They'll go out in the middle of wherever it is and just rip it open and take all the lithium out. And to hell with EPA, because we need that strategic. Anyway, Overreach. U.S. Department of Agriculture. Should it exist? Yes, it should. It should continue its block funding of various states to make sure that the education quality across America is as even as you can get it, despite the disparities in location, populations, economics, all those sorts of things. This is too long, but it's another big ramble, and I was playing with the green screen today, so I thought I would, and it's sort of working, sort of. Anyway, I sung around the stuff, and this is all about the Department of Education, federal overreach. I hope it records.